In the high-octane world of Formula One, a seismic shift has just occurred. Sergio Perez, a name that has been making waves in the F1 circuit, has found himself in the eye of a storm. Sergio Perez has silenced his critics as Red Bull Racing has decided to continue their collaboration with him until at least the end of this season, despite his contract being valid until the end of 2026. Amidst all the speculation and tests that Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo would receive in Imola, it seems the Austrian team is keen on keeping their current pair of drivers together. However, this decision is putting their Constructor Championship under direct threat from not only McLaren, but also teams like Ferrari and Mercedes. With the RB20 not being the fastest car on the grid in the last 8 races, could this turn out to be a pivotal mistake for Red Bull? And what does it mean for the young talents in Red Bull's stable, such as Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson? It goes without saying that Sergio Perez is one of the most controversial figures in the sport right now. Despite having a competitive car in his hands, his performance has been abysmal ever since he received his contract renewal. In the last 8 rounds, Perez managed to score only 28 points, compared to his teammate Max Verstappen, who scored a staggering 141 points. To put things in perspective, Perez scored an average of 3.5 points per race during this stretch, while Verstappen scored around 17.6 points per race. This disparity is helping Verstappen in his quest to win the 4th championship of his career, but it is undoubtedly putting a big dent in Red Bull's chances of winning the Constructor Championship by a large margin. Furthermore, Perez has been outqualified by Logan Sargent 8 times this season in a span of 14 races. That's being outqualified once every second racing weekend. Not to mention how much more he could have capitalized on races like Austria, where Verstappen had a collision, drove a full lap with a punctured tire, served a full pit stop, served a 10-second penalty, and still finished 2 places ahead of his teammate, who failed to defend against the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg. As of now, the gap between Red Bull and McLaren sits at 42 points, as the Woking-based squad managed to shave an additional 9 points from the Austrian squad, despite having a poor race with Lando Norris. The difference is that McLaren has 2 competitive drivers up ahead who are very close to each other, with Oscar Piastri being the 2nd highest scoring driver in this 8-race stretch. Regardless, the threat is real, and had it not been for the disqualification of George Russell, Mercedes would have been 18 points closer to the 100-point margin that could easily go down in the last 10 races, as the W15 has also proven to be a very competitive car. Elaborating on the future of Perez, Christian Horner went on to say, "Checo remains a Red Bull racing driver despite all the speculations of late. We look forward to seeing him perform at circuits where he has previously done well after the summer break." What seems quite confusing to understand is why Red Bull has even started talks about potential replacements for Perez when they ultimately decided that he would continue to be the driver next to Verstappen for the remainder of the season. With the latest news that Ricciardo will be remaining with Racing Bulls, it's now evident that Lawson should be looking for a seat elsewhere because there are no more seats available in the Red Bull nest. Even in Spa, the team had the perfect alibi to get rid of Perez because he started at P2, lost a position immediately at the start, and then went on to finish the race 8th with the fastest lap, which was promoted to 7th after Russell's unfortunate disqualification. This is the only reason why he is still 7th in the championship and not 8th, as it would have been the Mercedes driver who would have jumped ahead of him. This puts one of the 2 clauses that Red Bull had in the contract with Perez at an ever more valid point. Despite many critics believing that Perez has held up Verstappen in the race and ultimately made him fight his own teammate rather than letting him pass in that second stint, the 3-time world champion doesn't share this opinion. Verstappen went on to say, "No, Perez didn't hold me up. He was driving his own race. We made the right choice in that, and it wouldn't have made much difference to me if he had pulled over earlier." Our first concern is the car. That is where we have to focus at the moment. Checo's weekend was positive in my opinion. For context, reports have emerged that Red Bull has inserted 2 clauses in Perez's contract. The first one was that he wouldn't be 100 points below Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship, while the other one was that he wouldn't be lower than P6. Despite these 2 massively going in favor of Red Bull's fears, they still decided that Perez is the driver to continue with, even though he received a lot of criticism from Helmut Marko, who said that the Mexican driver totally collapsed during the Spa GP, and it wasn't something that they expected out of his race. This is where the cruel reality of the sport comes in. Perez brings a lot of revenue for Red Bull from merchandise sales as well as sponsorship dividends, which are likely more than enough to mitigate the loss that the team would receive if they were to lose the Constructors Championship to McLaren, which is now seeming like the endgame scenario of 2024. But despite McLaren, Mercedes is also on the rise, having two drivers constantly fighting for podiums and race wins. With Verstappen finishing the previous two races at P5 and not scoring podiums in each one of them, with this feature last time happening back in 2019, it's safe to assume that Red Bull is not in a perfect position right now. What this also goes to show is that they would much rather value financial stability than the growth of their young drivers, such as Tsunoda and Lawson. Earlier this year, Helmut Marko mentioned that if Red Bull is unable to secure a seat for Liam Lawson from 2025 onwards, there is a clause in his contract that allows him to explore opportunities elsewhere. As of now, Audi's interest in the young Kiwi driver seems to be quite high. They have already signed Nico Hülkenberg, and now all they need is a young talent who can prove to be the driving force of the team. Lawson is eager to show that Red Bull has lost a lot by not investing in him, and this move would make a lot of sense for him as well. With Lawson not replacing Daniel Ricciardo in the Racing Bull seat, it's important to remember that Marko has stated the wishes of the team's stakeholders. This is a team that must consist of two young drivers, and Lawson needs to be there as soon as possible. Unfortunately for Marko, the last two criticisms he directed towards Ricciardo and Perez didn't seem to have the desired effect. Instead, they have paved the way for Christian Horner, who now appears to have more and more power within the team, even when it comes to deciding who drives where. This could definitely come back to haunt Red Bull in the future if the car doesn't perform wonders for the remainder of the 2024 season and into 2025. The team hasn't won a race in the last 4 venues, and the last time they failed to win a race in more than 2 consecutive events was in 2022 at Austria and Silverstone. In 2021, they failed to win a race on 3 occasions in a row: Brazil, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. This indicates that the dominance of the Austrian team might finally be over, and they are putting all their hopes in the hands of Verstappen to win the Drivers' Championship. The Dutchman is now entering the summer break with a comfortable 78-point lead over Lando Norris. The Austrian squad should also be grateful that the McLaren team hasn't been as sharp with their strategy, as it could easily have been that Norris would have only had a 30 to 40-point deficit to Verstappen. This is where champions are made, and this is where championship mentality matters the most. However, it's an individual achievement, and as a team, Red Bull seems to have failed to look for what is best for the team, and rather, what is best for their lead driver. A couple of months ago, Verstappen and his father, Jos, were pushing hard towards signing Perez on a multi-year contract. This makes a lot of sense because the 3-time world champion had a solid lead over his teammate, and Perez wasn't any threat like he posed to be in the early stages of 2022 and 2023. Be that as it may, Red Bull is now showing their true colors, and when the masks are down, the reality is harsh for drivers like Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson. Despite both of them saying that they feel ready for the next big step, the team has definitely let them down. Continuing to work with a driver who is underperforming heavily is not the mentality we would expect to see, but here we are. Perez has 10 races to prove that the faith invested in him by Horner and Verstappen is going to pay off. However, starting P2 in Spa, definitely the best track for Red Bull, and finishing P8 is not a good sign for the races to come. With all this in mind, do you think that Red Bull has made the right decision to continue their collaboration with Perez? More importantly, if not, who do you think would be the best replacement for the 6-time race winner? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Formula One and want to stay updated with the latest news, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Keep the pedal to the metal, and we'll see you at the next race.